to get started. So Chuck, while I'm doing the brief intro, why don't you pull up and share your screen and get the slides on there? And I want to welcome everybody. This is our next of our series of our QuickBooks workshops regarding invoicing. And just a few housekeeping items before Chuck gets his slides up is one is you are all on mute, so that if you have any questions, please go to the Q&A box on there. We'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. And please ask questions as we're going through it. You know, there's no question that's too basic for us at the end of the day. You will be receiving a copy of this presentation as well as the recording at the end of the day. So no need to take a ton of notes because you'll be getting that. But obviously, Chuck will be showing you some things on the actual QuickBooks software. And then there will be a questionnaire that'll be sent to you after this workshop. We do look at all these as well as the feedback so that we can make, obviously, the workshops more applicable to what your needs are. And again, thank you for joining us. And then Chuck, next slide, please. This is QuickBooks for invoicing and invoice customization. So Chuck is going to work you through that entire process. Next slide. I want to introduce Chuck. Obviously, Chuck has been doing this now for 3 years. We are delighted to have him here. And we were just chatting before this workshop starting that obviously QuickBooks is changing at this point. And then there's more and more that's going on. So we're trying to update these and make these as relevant as possible. But as you can see, Chuck has a ton of experience in both accounting, management, and a controller. And right now he's trying to retire, but he's obviously doing part-time consulting, obviously helping people to set up their QuickBooks and volunteering to help us to do these workshops. And we greatly appreciate his support. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chuck and let him obviously take you through what we're going to discuss today.
Hello, everybody. So today we're going to be taking a look at how QuickBooks deals with invoicing. It's going to be a very high overview because I mean it's pretty entailed. We could use a whole day to talk about all of this stuff, but you know there's basics we can get into so that if you are doing invoicing, it should help you out. We'll do a bit of a demonstration through the whole invoice cycle. And then after that, I'll show you how you can do some customizing of invoices rather. I am an accountant, not a graphic designer, so I'll kind of touch on that stuff to where you can at least get the thing going. And then we'll talk a little bit about third-party applications. So before we get started, let's just take a look at the accounting side before we get into QuickBooks of an invoice cycle, all right? Because I think if you can at least understand the basic accounting, bookkeeping part of this, it may go a long way to understanding what's going on. So what happens is when you create an invoice, and this is QuickBooks, outside of QuickBooks, I mean, this is just accounting. What happens, it sets up, as you can see this entry right here, it sets up and I'm just using $100 as an example. It sets up an increase in your accounts receivable. Your accounts receivable is money that people owe you. It's a debit. I'm going to try and stay away from debit, credit, because that sort of drives people crazy. You know, what's a debit, what's a credit? And you don't really even need to understand that when you're dealing with QuickBooks, because QuickBooks was built for the non-accountant in mind. So we'll talk about increases and decreases. So when you set up an invoice and you post it, it increases your accounts receivable, as you can see right over here. And it also, on the opposite side, because there's always two entries, double entry bookkeeping, it sets up your revenue, sales, revenue, income, all the same thing. All right. Now, when you get paid on that invoice and you use the payment screen, which we will go through, all right, it sets up a payment journal that actually decreases the accounts receivable. So right here, it says nobody owes you anything anymore and puts that money into whatever cash account you have set up. So at the end of the day, what do you have? You have nothing left in accounts receivable. You have $100 in the bank. You have $100 in revenue. That's the end of it. Now, things can get quite a bit more complicated than this, but in most small businesses, and that's kind of what we're driving at over here, this is the cycle. So let's see. All right, we're not going to get there. So at this point, just give me a second. We're going to switch over to QuickBooks, and we're going to kind of see what this all looks like inside of QuickBooks, because that's why we're all here. Now, a few things I'll comment on before we even get into this. Right down here, I'm assuming that you folks can see my cursor as it's moving around. Karen, can you see my cursor?
Yes, I can. We're
Okay,
all good.
Good. So right down here, see this critical alert? All right, I am on QuickBooks Desktop, and as you can see, I'm on the Pro 2019 version. QuickBooks only supports the current version, which right now is 2023, and the prior 2 years. All right. I don't really use QuickBooks much anymore. My business is pretty much very small. So I use QuickBooks just to send out invoices, and that's it. I don't really have a lot of need for a lot of accounting. So I don't want to upgrade. The reason I don't want to upgrade because QuickBooks keeps jacking the price up. Used to be able to get one of these at Costco or Sam's for about 150. Retail was about 300. Well, now they're up to 549 bucks each year. You can't even just get a desktop, a standalone desktop. It's got to be it's a desktop version, but it's a subscription service where you have to pay $549 each and every year on their subscription service. And the reason they're doing this is they're trying to drive people more into their online version, which is even a little bit more expensive than that. I know quite a lot about the desktop version. I can work with the online version. Don't consider myself an expert on it, though. It's nowhere near as versatile and as flexible as the desktop, but that's the direction Intuit, who is the company that hosts QuickBooks. That's the direction they're going. So, any rate, one more thing. I find that people don't really know whether they're on the desktop version or whether they're on the online version, because I've run across a number of clients when I ask them, they tell me they're on the desktop, and sure enough, when I get in there, they're really on the online version. If you're paying something, very simple way to figure it out. If you're paying something each and every month, you're on the online version. If you're just paying once a year, or you have one of the older ones like I do, where you're not paying anything except for what you paid in the beginning, well, then you're on desktop. All right. And everything we're going to be talking about today is related to the desktop version. So, invoicing. Very simply, what happens when you invoice somebody, your screens, if you're on QuickBooks Desktop already, may look a little bit different. I've got these quick shortcuts set up, and you could do that on your own. This isn't a invoice. This isn't a QuickBooks customization class, so we're not going to get into all of that because we have limited time. But at any rate, you can go through the menus. Right. In this case, you go through customers, create invoices, or if you have a shortcut, you could hit this guy right here. So I guess I'll go through the menus just so you can see it, because no matter what you've done with your desktop, you're going to have these menu choices in here. So let's go to customers. Let's go to create invoices. And what comes up is a picture of one of QuickBooks standard templates. As you can see, they have a product invoice, they have a service invoice. I've kind of limited it. I've got a couple of customized ones here, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. But right now, we're just going to look at the Intuit standard service invoice. You got your date, your invoice number, who your customer is going to be. You're going to fill in item, quantity, description. Let's talk about items, because that's the driver right here. What an item is, and you set these up, it tells the invoicing system pretty much everything it needs to know, except for maybe the specific total for the invoice. It gives a lot of information, and it's what drives that invoice. So if I have one already picked, already set up rather, I stick that in there. Let's say it was carpentry. I kind of made believe I was a contractor in this one. All right. Quantity might be hours. You don't have to use it, but let's just say, for instance, it's 3 hours. You know, I did whatever. I don't type real well, so there you go. My rate, don't have to put a rate in, but let's just assume I have a rate of $50 an hour. So it already extends over to $150. All right. You don't have to put a rate in. You don't have to put a quantity in. You can put whatever you want in here for the price, and it'll take it. What this guy over here is, and you'll see when we're going to set up a new item so you can kind of see how this is going. You're telling that item whether this is a taxable or a non-taxable sale. And when I say taxable, I mean sales tax. All right. If I said if it was taxable, then nothing happened. Probably because I didn't set it up in the item. But anyway, we'll fix that. For the moment, let's just say it's non-taxable, because in South Carolina, carpentry would be non-taxable. If you see here, it actually made up its own rate because I had 3 hours, and it just, when I put in the 500, it backed into a rate. You don't need the rate. You can get rid of it. There's a lot of things you could do on the invoice. But anyway, let me get rid of this. Control delete. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that line. Let's go right from scratch. I can either add a new item by hitting this, or I can do it this way. Let's just say I want an item for sheetrock. I type that in. I tab over, and I already had set one up for sheetrock, so I'm going to have to figure something else out. I forgot that I had done that already. Oh, I don't know. Let's just call it, I have one. Let's call it framing. Okay. There is no framing item, so I could have either hit new, add new, and created it, or just type in framing. Tells me it doesn't find framing. Would I like to add it now? I say yes. And it gets me right to the same screen. That is if I had hit add new from that drop-down list. Now, you have various types of items. And we're only going to talk about a few of them here, because a lot of these types you'll never use. All right, so I try and tailor this to what I feel the vast bulk of clients in my experience have used. So a service is exactly that. You're performing a service. That's what this one's going to be. Inventory part, you're going to want to stay away from completely, unless you have an accounting background and can deal with some of the funky accounting that the QuickBooks will do when it comes time to creating an inventory. You do not want to deal with that. You might be selling maybe material of some sort. Maybe you're billing for material, and that would be a non-inventory part. Other charge would be some kind of a miscellaneous charge that you might be putting on the invoice. Maybe it's travel time or something along those lines. Subtotal is one that I've seen used, and what a subtotal item is if you have various lines on the invoice and you want to get a subtotal of those, you just create a subtotal item, you put it down wherever it is, and it will automatically add up all the amounts that precede it. And where that comes in handy is if you are going to create a discount item. What a discount item allows you to actually put a negative amount on the invoice if you want to give some kind of a courtesy discount. I do that myself when I'm billing a client. If I feel that, maybe I spent 4 hours there and we really didn't get 4 hours worth of, work out of it, maybe I'll credit it back an hour, whatever it might be. So in that case, I would have all my different, things that I was billing for coming down here. I would use that subtotal item, and then I would come and create this discount item. I would call it maybe discount 10%, discount 20%, whatever it might be. And I would then put the dollar amount that I want to discount, or usually the percentage. So that if I use that item down here, it's going to take that percentage, it's going to apply it against that subtotal and actually create a credit on the invoice that'll reduce the invoice total. All right, so well, let's get back to where we were going here.
And
So,
Chuck, while you're pausing and going over, I just want to remind everyone, please, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. We'll be happy to answer them as we go through the presentation. So thank you.
yeah, I would actually, rather do that. If you have questions, we can stop and answer them as we're on that topic, or we can do it later on, but it's usually good if we can do it, as we're actually presenting that topic.
Mhm.
So at any
So,
rate,
actually, we do have one question now. It says, I'm in the insurance industry and not billing customers because I represent several vendors. I need QuickBooks to keep up with expenses such as mileage, supplies. Is QuickBooks the best tool for my business? It's a little off topic.
no, you know what? It's amazing that somebody's actually asking that question, because I've been thinking a lot about that lately myself. And very recently, I have started advising people that if they're in that situation right there, you're not invoicing, you don't need a true balance sheet. You just need track of your expenses, and you can create sort of a makeshift balance sheet anyway. A much less expensive way to go is Quicken. You Quicken, you can actually, I don't want to get into a whole class about Quicken, but Quicken, you can categorize things. It looks a whole lot different than QuickBooks. Quicken used to be a product of Intuit also. It's now been bought by somebody else, but they do integrate together. And when I say that, what I mean is, if all of a sudden your business grows and all of a sudden now you need, and I have one prospective client in mind when I talk about this, all of a sudden your business grows and now you're going to invoice, you need a little bit more. Maybe you become a subchapter S where you need a true balance sheet. You can then export your data from Quicken into QuickBooks. You don't have to start all over again, and have some historical data. So that would be my advice. Quicken is somewhere in the area of about $80 a year. It's also a subscription, a damn sight cheaper than $549 a year. So I hope that answers that question.
So another follow-up question. I'm starting a freight truck dispatching service. Will this help my business? I will be billing the carrier and I want to track my expenses.
Yes, because you would bill the carrier through QuickBooks, create the invoice just like we're doing here. That'll allow you to track your accounts receivable. And if we have time at the end of this, I can show you some of the reports that are associated with that. And it will also track your expenses, your payroll. Yes, this would definitely help. And that's not a good case for Quicken. QuickBooks is the right fit for that. Anybody else?
Nope, we're good. You can keep going.
Okay, so we're setting up framing as a service type item. Subtotal means that, I'm sorry, sub item rather. Yeah, I might have a major item that I have items related to it that I want to roll up, and that's what this sub item is. I've seen it used, not a lot, going to kind of stay away from it. So you can put and again, Mr. Typer, no good. So You could put a description if you want a set description, or maybe you just do something like you put framing in there. Framing. Now you can tell why I don't want to do the typing. If you have a standard rate, I'm just going to put $50 in there. You can put a rate in it. You don't have to. Here's where you tell the system whether that is a sales taxable item or not. In the case of framing in South Carolina, or any service in South Carolina, it's not. And then you tell QuickBooks what account in your chart of accounts, some people refer to them as categories, that you want that to go on. If you recall that little T account exercise we did before we got into this, I told you that it's an increase in accounts receivable. Well, QuickBooks already knows it's going to do that because it's an invoice. The only thing you have to tell it is what the offset to that is, which in this case is going to be some kind of sales. As you can see, these accounts here, these are your income accounts. So I'll just say service revenue, for lack of anything else. So that when I post this invoice, it's going to be I swore I was going to stay away from debits and credits, so I will. It's going to be an increase in your accounts receivable. It's also going to be an increase in your sales revenue, So I am now going to say okay on that. And as you can see, it posted it in there. I don't have a quantity, so it filled in the rate that I gave it. It filled in framing dash. And the reason I put the dash in there is then you can just free form type whatever it is that you did for that work. Or don't put anything in there when you create the item, and you can stick it in here on the invoice. It's very flexible. All right. If you don't bill by the hour, if you don't want to show hours, and you'll see that when we do a little bit of customization, and you just have sort of a flat price, well, don't put anything in the quantity, and don't put anything in the rate on the item. If I'm going to get rid of that, and you stick in whatever your flat fee was. Oh, it's not 500,000 because I'm not hiring you. And that's it. So very basically, go ahead.
So Chuck, we do have a follow-up question from the earlier one. Is QuickBooks a good fit for a home care agent? And does it work with the Square app or other payment agencies?
It's a good fit for pretty much any business that's out there. I've consulted on a lot of businesses, and I haven't seen one where it wasn't a good fit for. All right, that's number one. Number two, yes, it does work with Square, but I don't think, although don't quote me, I don't think the desktop version works with Square, but I know the online does. All right, that's where QuickBooks has gone and done pretty much all of its programming is on the online version. The online version does work with quite a bit of third-party vendors. What you could do is just do a Google search, say third-party apps for QuickBooks Desktop, and you'll see what's out there. All right, there used to be more, but like I said, they're going more towards the online. Something came right in and out of my mind when I said that. Oh yeah, this thing about things like Square and other point of sales, working with QuickBooks. It's not always the best idea to tie one of these into QuickBooks. The fact of the matter is, on a small business, if you're using Square or you're using Shopify or any of these other point of sale systems, they have a plethora of reporting because they're meant to be point of sale systems. If you look into QuickBooks just to track your revenue and your expenses, setting up your invoices, paying your bills, you don't really need that interface between them. Because very simply, if you're a cash-based cash-based business, which the vast majority of small businesses are, you simply are reporting as income what gets posted by Square or whatever third party you're using to your bank statement, to your checking account rather. And you just can pick up that entry from your checking account and post that as a deposit right into QuickBooks. You don't need these fancy interfaces. You don't need that level of detail in QuickBooks because, again, you've got the reporting in those third-party applications. I hope that answers that.
And then there's just a follow-up comment from another attendee is as an FYI, if you need to track mileage, there is an app called Mile IQ, MILE, capital I, capital Q. Simple way to track your trips and create reports. This does not replace QuickBooks, but it's a great, easy tool for those who need to track mileage.
Yes. Yes,
so
I don't.
going back to Chuck's point, is that there are other softwares out there that are better to do whatever it is you need to do, and whether that's, you know, tracking customers and who bought what and what did you sell. Think of QuickBooks as your accounting system. You know, unfortunately, debits and credits, your income statement and financial statements. You know, because to get into some of the others, and Chuck can talk more to that, it's not meant for that. At the end of the day, it's not meant for tracking inventory and sales and by cost and all the other things. So, you know, you have to understand what your needs are for the business and whether they're very, very basic or they're a bit more complicated.
Exactly. You know, it reminds me of a dental professional I was consulting with a number of years back. And they had a point of sale system, and their bookkeeper, they had it all tied into QuickBooks, and the point of sale, a practice management system, they call it, was interfacing everything that they had into QuickBooks, all this transaction level detail. And then the bookkeeper would spend hours reconciling what went into QuickBooks back to what was in the point of sale, the practice management system. And there was things that didn't come across, and they were spending a ton of time. And I asked a very simple question: why are you doing that? And they had no answer. Because there's no reason. There just isn't any reason. You have your point of sale, you have your QuickBooks, what gets into your bank, you know, you want to test what's in your practice management or your point of sale based on back to what they deposit into your bank. But once it's in the bank, you just post it as a deposit here. Take the simple route. Okay. Anybody else?
Nope, that's it. Keep going.
All righty, getting more questions this time. Okay. I'll go if I remember where the hell I was. Yeah, there we are. All right, so we've got this invoice. We're gonna save it. Let me make sure I got everything I want here. I got distracted a little bit. Okay. So I've got an invoice. So the customer job cannot be blank. QuickBooks is smarter than I am. I never told the system who the customer was. So we'll call this customer one. All right, switching between customers. Don't worry about that one. Okay, that's why the sales tax didn't populate before. Now I realize. The sales tax is predicated at one or combination of two levels. You tell the item, remember we talked about the item over here, whether it's a taxable item or not, but you also, when you're setting up a customer, and I'll tell you what, why don't we do that? We'll add a new customer in here. Customer name, you're just putting in this box here will show on your customer list. It can be abbreviated, it could be anything you want, just something that when you see it on the list, you know who to pick. Then you fill in all the pertinent information that you want to see about that customer, their name and their address over here, or maybe you strictly email invoices and you don't want the address there, whatever it might be. Okay. Over here, payment settings. If QuickBooks, you can link a third party merchant service to your QuickBooks. It's usually QuickBooks themselves, and you can accept credit card payments. We're not going to get into that today because that could be a class all by itself. But if you were accepting credit cards, that's where you put the customer's credit card information in here. Sales tax settings, that's really what I wanted to get to. Here's where you're saying whether that customer is a taxable customer or not. And everybody's taxable unless they're a 501c3, which is a nonprofit organization, maybe some government entities and things like that. That's where you would tell it whether it's that this customer is taxable or not taxable. All right. And then you would set up whatever the tax item is. I already have one in here called, South Carolina sales tax. And there's where you put the rate of the sales tax. And then, there's another one. I'm sorry, I was wrong on what I said before. Even regular businesses, if they are a reseller, all right, if they're a reseller of merchandise down to the public, they are not taxable. All right, the retail sale itself is the taxable item. All right, so that's where I would set that up. And once I told the system that, yes, this customer is taxable, but this service is not, QuickBooks would make up its mind whether it's going to put sales tax in there or not. So in this case, it would not put any sales tax. All right, so that's what that's all about. All right, so customer one, I think we can probably save it now. One other thing I'll talk about, terms. You can set up your terms in here, whether it's due on receipt, whether it's due in 15 days, 30 days. Net 30 is a very common term. You can set up discounts over here. If you're giving a time discount for people to pay in 10 days or whatever it might be. All right. So we will save that. All right, I've got the spell check on, so we'll get rid of that. All right, that's setting up the invoice. Now what happens when somebody pays the invoice? Well, a couple different ways you can come and do that. You can go back into customers. Again, I've got a shortcut right here for it, but just to show you where it is. You can go back into customers and you can go into receive payment. That's one way to get to it. You could go to custom, which is actually the easier one, I guess. You go to customers. You could go to the customer center. Come on up. You could go to the customer you're talking about. You could bring up the invoice. And I've seen people do this a number of different ways. And from here, you could say, why isn't it saying it? Make copy, later, receive payments right there. You can say receive payment. Either way you do it, it's going to come back to the same screen. So we're here now. Why don't we do it from here? Doing it this way, it knows exactly what invoice it's looking for. It knows the customer. So some people like that. The payment amount may or may not be the full amount. Okay, we all know that. In this case, it's assuming it's the $500 for the invoice amount. Here you would put the date. Usually, some people like to put the date of the customer's check. Some people like to put the date they got the money in. It's really whatever you like. Here, reference number, you can put the check number, assuming it's a check, or if it's cash, you can tell QuickBooks which way it is. If there's any invoices that are outstanding, will be listed right here. And in this one, I went right to that invoice, so it knew to check off that particular invoice. If I didn't, and I had put the 500 in, it would search for $500 invoices. It would pick the oldest one. So you really kind of got to be careful what it checks off of here. If you have a list of invoices for that customer, you want to make sure that you're checking off the correct invoice. All right, because if not, that'll give you all sorts of issues. This guy right here, deposit to. I want to spend a couple minutes on this because this is where people go south. And for those trying to reconcile their checking account, they have a lot of problems because they're doing something wrong. And it all depends now on how you get that payment. Let's take one example. Let's say you get a few checks in, you're a contractor, and maybe the easiest way for you to do it is to take your phone, shoot a picture of the check, and mobile deposit it. I see a lot of people doing that these days, and that's fine. But what you got to understand is when you do it that way, each and every check shows up on your bank statement as an individual deposit, and that's fine too. But then that's the way you want it to be shown in QuickBooks. The reason for that is when you go to reconcile, you're basically looking at your bank statement. You're looking at each individual transaction. You're looking at a list of transactions in QuickBooks, and you want those to be able to line up. Okay. So if you're depositing checks individually, you would want the deposit to go right to checks, right to your checking account. Let's go another way. Maybe you get a lot of checks in and your bookkeeper sits down and she brings up a deposit ticket and she actually lists each of those. Let's just say we have 5 checks, $100 a piece. And she lists all 5 of those checks on the deposit slip. And then the deposit total is $500. Well, if you put each of those $500 checks in here individually, but yet a deposit slip that you bring to the bank shows $500, your bank statement's going to say $500. Your QuickBooks is going to say 100, 100, 100, 100. You do enough of these, and obviously they're not all going to be the same amount, and like it is in this simple example, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to match what's on the bank statement to what's in QuickBooks. So the vehicle for that then is I would post each one of those to something called undeposited funds. And that's kind of what I'm going to do with this on this particular one, because that creates an extra step, but it's well worth it. So I'm going to. So the next step then is I'm going to deposit. I've got a shortcut here, but again, I'll show you where it is on the menu. I just got a message said my internet connection is unstable. Keep your fingers crossed, folks. And I would hit make deposit. If I have any undeposited funds out there, a little interim window comes up. And there's that one that I did. In the example I was giving, there would have been 5 of them. Or there might have been more if I didn't, depending on what I had. I would check off the ones that make up that $500 deposit. Then I would hit OK. And it's funny, I don't see anything here. Why is that? Thank you. Deposit. Uh-oh. Karen, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, because I'm frozen here. Let me get out of here. Okay. I thought maybe the computer went down on me. Let me do that again, because I don't know why it did that.
Yeah, because it shows the payment applied, so I'm not sure why it's not showing up on that report. Yeah, because the payment's there.
Okay, I'm going to check that off. Maybe I didn't check it off. Okay. I must not have checked it off. Anyway.
Don't panic yet, Chuck.
That's what I love about, doing this live. You can see what the audience is doing. But anyway, so in the example I was giving, I would then have seen all 5 of those deposits as the detail and a $500 deposit down here. When I hit save and close, and I would go back to my check register, instead of seeing 5 individual 100s, I would see one $500 deposit, which then would line up with what the bank statement said. Any questions on that? Nothing yet, huh, Karen?
Nothing popping up.
Okay. All righty. So that really is the invoice and payment cycle. Again, it can get more in depth, but this kind of just gives a high level flavor of what QuickBooks is doing here. Okay. Unless there's any other questions, I am going to move on to invoice customization.
And that makes sense because we got about 15 more minutes.
Okay. All right. And again, I'm going to qualify this. I'm an accountant, not a graphic designer. So I'm going to give you, the highlights of how you go about doing it. And this is one of those things that you just fool around with. You try it out, you take a look at it, you don't like it, you go back in, you just keep fooling around until you get it to be what you want. So we bring an invoice up, just a blank invoice. Again, this is Intuit service invoice. That's their standard template. If I were to do a print preview of that, that's what that invoice would look like without any customization, whatsoever. Pretty bland. I mean, it does the trick. If that's what you want, fine. All right. If you wanted to get it a little bit more glamorous, there are ways you can fool around with it. All right. So let me close that out. And the way you would do that is if you go into lists and you go into templates, it gives you a list of all the templates that are out there. Right. And the one we're fooling around with here is the invoice, the Intuit service invoice. Now, as you can see, I've got a Chuck's invoice out there. I've got a My Design Chuck's invoice. We're going to kind of fool around with this thing a little bit, but then at the end, I'll kind of show you what it could look like without having to go through all the steps, because I've only got less than 15 minutes left. So if I hit that, all right, it starts bringing up a basic customization screen. On the standard invoice, I can make these changes and it'll allow me. If I want to do anything more exotic than this, all right, it's going to want me to make a copy of the template because it wants to keep the integrity of the template in there. So I can do things like I can use a logo, all right. I could select the logo. Say, I've got some, JPEGs out here, image files, and it sticks a logo in there. Let's see what else. I can, if you notice, it's all black. I can let's make it blue. I call my company Lakeside Consulting, so I usually do it in blue. I apply that color scheme, now everything comes out in blue. I can change the font for the title, for the company name. So I'll tell you what, let's do something with the company name. I'll change the font. Now, it's already picking up the company name because and the address, because in QuickBooks, that information's already there when you do the setup of your company file. So I don't know. Let's see what we have here. I think there's something called Rush Script or something. Yeah. Let's do a brush script. Let's make it bigger. I don't know. We'll do something. I don't know. I don't know how this is going to work out, but we'll do 28. Gives you an example of what you got going on here. And this is standard Windows functionality at this point. Say OK. All right, it's got it in there. It's a little crowded, but you'll see later on where we can fool around with that. I can say I want the company name, the company address, so I can have all this other information. I would just check these off. I can have it print a past due stamp on there if I want to recreate it and send it to a customer and say, hey, you haven't paid me yet. I can print a status stamp on there, so when it is paid, it shows as a paid invoice. All right. Let's go into some additional customization. Okay. Here's where it's going to tell me, yep, you can't go any further. All right. It doesn't want me to get any more exotic with that standard template. So, Karen, when did you want me to cut off? At about 5:02 or so?
Yeah, that would be fine. That'd be great. And then we could do the
Okay.
wrap-up slides. Mm-hmm.
Just automatically calls a copy of Intuit Customer Service. I can rename that if I want. I hope that goes away. Here, I can either, these are all the various fields that you see. I can either tell it I just want to see it on the screen, or I want to see it on the screen and print it, whatever, whatever combination I want. I can rename these. These are the default titles. I can call it whatever I want. That's these labels right in here. I can call these whatever I want to call them. I'm going to kind of leave that alone. Then if I want to maneuver this thing around a little bit, maybe I want to change columns around. No, I'm sorry. We're not going to get into that yet. The next tab here is columns. Maybe I don't want the columns in the order that they're in. Here's where I tell it. I want, column number 1, column number 2. But if you notice, item, there is no item in here. And that's because I don't really want the item to show. The item's for my own internal use. Excuse me a second. The item's for my own internal use. So I'm telling it that I want it on screen, but I don't want it printed. If I wanted it printed, I would do that. It's going to tell me a problem because it doesn't really have a place to go. All right. So I'm just going to say default layout. They're about to lose. Oops. Do you want to use it? No. Okay. If I wanted to stick that in there, there it is. It moved quantity over to there. I don't really want it. So I'm just going to get rid of it, and it's going to keep quantity where it is. I could tell it, though, that I want quantity to be number, let's see. If I want quantity back over here, all right, I'm not going to fool around too much with this because I'm going to run out of time. But at any rate, again, this is the thing you got to play with. You would just tell it right here what order you want these columns to be in. All right. I can have a footer, or I can have a long text field that I can type whatever I want. I can have a customer message field right here, which there are. If you go back into lists into QuickBooks, you can come up with standard, have a nice day, you're a great customer, whatever the heck you want to say to them, and it'll print it right on the invoice right down and over here. All right. Print is just telling it, where to print it. All right. Now, if we go to the layout designer, so let's imagine we've got kind of what we want. Go out to the layout designer. Here is where you can move things around. You just grab the field. Let's just say this one here. Maybe I want to kind of get this a little bit smaller because I don't need all of that. Maybe I want to move it down a little bit. I don't want it to go. You see these green things right here? This is for trifolding the invoice and sticking it into a double window envelope. So you want your address and their address both to show. But then I could take Chuck's Playground. I could kind of move it down. I can make it a little bit bigger so it shows. And that's it. I can do the same thing with any of these things, move them around. I can make them different colors. You double click on it and the whole font thing comes at the properties thing comes up here where you can change the font. You can tell it whether you want borders. But again, this is what you would need to fool around with. I'll say okay. Okay, I could take a look at the print preview, and that came out actually halfway decent. All right. basically, you know, I would probably move this line over a little bit, but that's where you play with it. What you can wind up with is, tell you what, let's get out of this whole thing. You can wind up with something. Well, this is pretty close to what I had anyway. Something along those lines, or if you really want to get exotic, there are templates that you can download. Like here. That's not where I want to be. You can download templates, you have the same basic information, but a little more exotic looking, and the way you would download those templates. Then I think I'll be done, Karen. Let's close this. What you would do is back in this, remember I got here by going lists, templates. It's my list of all my templates. You come right down in here, and I can download templates from Intuit, but right there, it's going to stop me because of this guy, right? I'm not really supported, but you can download templates from them. You can do this create form design thing, which Intuit does allow because these are all the ones they want you to pay for. But there's some, you know, some pretty decent looking ones in there. And again, it depends on how exotic you want to get, or if you just want to go bland with, you know, what they give you. You can click on any one of these. Takes a couple seconds. There you go. All right. And then you just keep hitting next. And when you get to the end, it says, hey, you got $5 or whatever it is. They let you have it. And then you go customize it through that same process that we just went through. And you got yourself a custom invoice. All right. Key takeaways. Any questions, Karen?
Not at this point.
Okay. Key takeaways: set up invoice items relevant to your business. Inventory items complicate your accounting. I'd stay away from them. Customize invoices to suit your business, and third-party apps can extend your functionality. And what you could do is resources. QuickBooks for Dummies, got a lot of good stuff in there. Google searches such as Learn QuickBooks, QuickBooks Desktop Invoicing. They got some great material online. Or if you want to take a look at those apps we were talking about, here's a link for you, desktop.apps. You'll see what's available out there for the desktop version. Oh, I went a minute over it, Karen. Sorry.
That's okay, Chuck. But as part of wrapping up, you went backwards.
Yeah. Okay.
There we go. As part of wrapping up, though, and I know in talking to my clients about this and using QuickBooks, if you are not financially savvy or feel comfortable with software, you know, two things I would advise is one is if you are going to get QuickBooks, get someone to set it up for you. You know, doing all this, as you can see, as Chuck was going back and forth, I mean, it is easy to sort of go down to this, you know, rabbit hole and suddenly say, what the heck did I do? Because, and if you don't understand the relationship between the entries, invoicing, reporting, and everything else, you may get yourself in trouble very, very quickly at the end.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. So, you know, if you are financially savvy, then obviously, yes, use QuickBooks for Dummies and, you know, look at that and see if you can make head or tails, but obviously looking at other people to help. The other thing is obviously there are many, many bookkeeping firms that help you with QuickBooks. But again, these are your books. You need to obviously make sure you understand you know, what is going on at the end of the day, and go from there. So, you know, it's critical that you first understand, as the questions we saw in the beginning, what makes sense for you. If all you need is to track expenses, that's great. If there is, you know, anything else that you need to do, just be smart about it, I guess, is at the end of the day, and what's going on. QuickBooks is not an easy software package if you do not have a financial background. If you do, then you could probably get through it with some help. And obviously, Chuck is always there to help you at the end of the day. So with that, let's wrap up for the last slides. Chuck, next slide. There's one more. Obviously, we went through invoicing, but the next one is reporting and report customization. This is an important one if you're going to go forward with it with QuickBooks, is understanding what reports are available to you, so you're not scrounging around, especially when it's year end and your tax accountant is suddenly say, well, do you have a list of whatever you need, or your balance sheet or income statement? So November 16th, join us for our last of our wrap up for this year. Next slide. We also have had a social media series. We've got 2 left, is the 14th, public relations. And then November 30th is going to be a really, I believe, a dynamic workshop, is as far as what's your strategic approach for social media. Again, it's one of the many questions we get from our clients to say, how do I use social media for my business? Next slide. We have 2 more. The other one was last week, is funding from SBA. This is not just a veteran series, even though it's aimed at a lot of our vets that we have here. One is how do you get funding from the SBA versus the personal credit and small business lending. Will be wrapping up again in November. Next slide. And we are starting at the end of this month our nonprofit series. There are 1,600 nonprofits in Beaufort and Jasper County alone. And we have now for the 3rd or 4th year now put together a nonprofit series. So if you know of a nonprofit, you volunteer for a nonprofit, let them make aware of what we're doing, and volunteer management, board management, fundraising, and the other topics that are important. Next slide. And we have had an intellectual property series. The next one is December 7th, and basically talking about designs, provisions, and utilities, and how do you protect all that important information for your business. So please join us. If you need a mentor, we are here. You can ask us any question and we will get you the right expertise to obviously answer that. So please go to our website, find a mentor, put in your zip code, say what you're looking for, and someone will be in touch with you. Next slide. Is that be part of something special. We obviously, if you want to volunteer, we have not just mentor positions. We need Spanish speaking, obviously, people, because we're getting more and more requests, as well as people who can help us with design and social media, and obviously doing these workshops. Next slide. And please follow us on social media. Here are all of our various social media obviously accounts, and when you get this, you can click on the link and follow us. And next slide. And we are a resource partner of the SBA, so we have to say that. And with that, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Chuck, for obviously the insight, and we look forward to seeing you all on our next workshop. Thank you all. Have a good day. Bye now.